Ladies and gentlemen, this is internet personality Vangelus, and this is Mastermind Creations' new Studio Aux-oriented masterpiece-alike project, Ocular Max. And the first entry in the Perfection series is Sphinx, their take on Mirage, who never really had a Studio Aux design. So instead, this piece is done in the spirit of their anime robot aesthetic, packed in a Diaclone box that calls out a sweet little credit list on its inner flaps. High fives to HardReturn.net's Ian Reed. Sphinx turns into an F1 racer that's based intensely on the Ligier JS11. The dark blue hue and the white blocks with red pinstriping are all drawn from that piece of source material, as are the copious branding tampograpphs. 26 Citanes is a straight-up G1 Mirage throwback, pulling the same intentional misspelling of Gitanes as the original, and just as shamelessly tossing in a few copies of the French cigarette company's Dancing Gypsy logo. There are also a few instances of Liger, a misspelling of Ligier, along with L on the hood, which tweaks Mirage's original ELF marking. Finally, and totally at the top of my list, is Goo-Year. Gotta go Goo-Year. And those Goo-Year tires are made of a silicone rubber compound that was specifically called out by MMC to be very durable and long-lasting. So, I guess we'll see as the years roll on. This thing just came out, there's no way I can test that, at least as of this recording. The tires do a good job of that whole rolling thing, though the front ones have a tendency to sag outwards on their transformation joints if any pressure pushes down on the car. They also are capable of some pleasantly axled turning action. Each of the rear wheels can turn as well, though they operate on an individual basis. There's a lovely use of chrome on the engine and hubcaps, lovely in that it's extremely sparse and used only as a handful of visual pops. And overall, the color work on this guy is pretty darn good in car mode. There are a few spots where the white on blue could have used a slightly stronger coat, or the finer edges of paintwork lost some crispness in execution, but I'd put those on par with what I've seen in official Masterpiece releases. As for alt mode gimmickry, you can adjust the rear spoiler as you see fit, and add some weapons to it to nullify its real-world function entirely. There's also a keen, translucent blue Hollow Man that you can plug into the driver's seat. Sadly, he has nowhere to go in robot mode, but I remain unsure if that's even a reasonable demand on my part. A whole lot happens in Sphinx's transformation, but it all follows my favorite cardinal rule. Once you mess with something, you're done with it. And even better, Sphinx is totally built to become a robot from the ground up, you know, the logical way. The rear of the alt mode slowly extends and reshapes, with the only truly tricky part being the dislodging of the conjoined rear and top outer panel pieces, which then do a lovely bit of mass placement to suck into the main shin mass of the legs. I would say that the lower body and backpack are by far the best parts of the conversion process in how friggin' cleanly everything moves and comes together. The only parts that don't live up to that standard are the feet, which remain kinda loosey-goosey for the sake of poseability. I wish they had a more solid base click-in point. Anyway, the arms aren't bad or anything, I just find they're not as impressive to watch in motion. That spatial swap between the compressed elbow joints and the forearm cover flap is pretty cool. By the way, remember to slide the 26 panels up on his shoulders. They don't really click into place, but it's very helpful to have them slightly out of the way of the elbows. The process ends on a very high note, albeit a slightly finicky one. There's a bit of a trick to getting that red-lined collarbone piece to fold down happily, but once you've got it, the final chest compression is impressive as hell. The front tires and bumpers straight up vanish within Sphinx's center mass, and it still puts a smile on my face every time I finish transforming this guy. I also smile whenever I look at Sphinx in bot mode because his silhouette is straight up mecha sexy. The proportions are to die for, and the natural stance is gorgeous. Even from behind, Sphinx is a smooth and uncluttered bipedal robot man, despite the large number of stacked and shuffled panels in his lower legs and torso. Like, nothing about this robot mode suffers for the car mode, just as nothing in the car mode felt sacrificed for the sake of turning into a robot. Stylish and classy. Gush session concluded. The color placements in robot mode are pretty good, using all the stuff from the alt mode and just adding more of it, with clearly defined arms, legs, and hips. The head sculpt has a good sphinxy helmet shape, but the face is a tad too mushy in its mouth definition for my tastes. I get where it's coming from, but I think more lip-line chisel would have done it well. But hey, let's say you're sick of that face, or the copious tampagraphing on the back of Sphinx's head. There are replacements, but getting the backplate dislodged is insanely hard, as its connections are insanely tight. Be very careful if you want to do this, as many have inadvertently damaged their toy's helmet in the process. You can now swap in a clean blue cranial backside if you want, but swapping the face involves the further step of removing a screw to pop out the old one, and honestly, the alternate face is too goofy for me. He goes from a smirk to a clownish grin, and I don't feel it's worth the hassle. That, and there's some real messy silver paint splatter on my copy's smiley face. In general, I like the idea of all these alternate head parts, but the execution's a real unpleasant miss. The rifle and missile launcher turned out pretty well, though. Sphinx holds his gun via the tried and tested palm slot method, while his launcher clips solidly onto a rail near his neck. It all looks pretty good, but that launcher could have used some extra joints. Not just to have an actual range of movement, but also to be able to get out of the way of the head. It's pretty easy to accidentally muck up the right side of Sphinx's helmet during posing by scraping and banging it up against the launcher. Let's say you got the dark blue first edition version of Sphinx. Your box should have had a thinner white box inside, which contains 2 bonus accessories. One of them is another alternate face, with a slightly different helmet design and a mouth sculpt that doesn't really do a single thing to make me want to go through the trouble of swapping it in. But the other bonus piece is a clear yellow techno parachute with legit metal posable wires that end in nice meaty handles that connect to Sphinx's palm slots. The metal wiring and solid handles are what push this from a forgettable bonus to a proper display option, though you're still gonna need some kind of armature display stand to make full use of the accessory. Sphinx's head is on a ball joint which allots it all kinds of movement all over the place, and when there's no missile launcher here, there's no impediment. If you find that he is bumping into stuff or you can't get quite the kind of tilt you want, his transformation joint is also a kind of secondary neck joint, which allows him to do a lot of looking up, looking down, and then just giraffing out a little bit. Just a touch, because you can see there his neck's kind of floating. If you don't like that, you can suck it down. His neck's no longer floating. It's set. His shoulders are friggin' full of joints, man. So there's a forward and backward joint, and then there is a other direction joint. Sorry, I want to get to this. There's a second one of those here as well, so you can get 2 of them going. And then you get one of these joints as well, dedicated just for this kind of stuff. That's a lot of joints in a shoulder for a transforming robot, and I really like it. Also, when you're doing his arm articulation, the thingamadoo here, I mentioned, you want to make sure it stays clipped up. It's real easy for this thing to kind of sag down a little bit, because it doesn't click into place up there. It kind of just friction locks and sort of works its way back down halfway. And that can make, there's a very smart cut clearance here for this bicep swivel and this double jointed elbow, which allows for that kind of curling. Do you see how I'm layering all these up? We're efficient. If this thing is getting in your way still, here's a real cool thing. You just move it like that. Now it's out of the way. A lot of people just do this as part of his transformation. I like angling it back just a little bit. So if that doesn't bother you, you have a real easy solution. His wrists can swivel around, and if you use the transformation joint here, they can get a little bit of forward tilt, although you do reveal a bit of a gap in there. Unless you bend the elbow while you do it, then you can fill the gap up some more. There are solutions, ladies and gentlemen. His hands have got a couple of joints. There are 2 knuckle joints and then a thumb joint. I'm leading into this because it's real exciting. It's just hand joints. So the knuckles open, right? And they look okay when they're open. The index finger can stay out, so he can kind of point, but it's more of a hey, come here kind of thing. And then his thumb is on a straight up just swivel joint to go up and down, like that. So he can kind of give a thumbs up, and that's all I can really see that thumb joint being useful for in terms of posing. So I'm a little confused by his hands. They're not terrible, just they have joints that don't immediately make sense to me. He's got a waist swivel, fully unimpeded. It's great, especially with all this clean, smooth stuff just moving around. And then, surprise to me, he's got a little bit of an ab joint as well, just a tiny one, which should be in focus when I show it to you so you can see what it's actually doing. This lets him go that far forward. Why would you want that? Well, let's see, you have him in, a hero stance pose, his legs back a little bit. You can then tilt that forward a bit to straighten out his shoulder line and give him a very organic, calm stance. It's lovely if you're into that kind of thing. His hips have got universal joints, and they've got panels of skirt that can get out of the way. Those can get out of the way, these can get out of the way. Then he can kick forward, he can kick backward, he can kick outward, and he can almost do the splits. I mean, one would still consider this the splits, but they're not the full 180 splits. He's got a thigh swivel, and then a double jointed knee, which allows for a proper bit of curl. And here's the cool thing, he can kind of stand on one leg if you balance him properly. And I love it when toys that are really posable can also do this. It's just the ultimate show-off. His ankles have got tilts for the entire foot assembly, and then the final joint, quote-unquote joint, is his, his toe can do all this. I mentioned it doesn't really lock in place, and I don't really find it that useful for posing, other than like, oh, I've got him in a weird pose, I wonder if I can tilt his foot down. Okay, I guess I can. It never emotes to me, it's more just a structural thing, so for sure, it can be useful. But, I think it's just, of all the things on this toy, the foot, it looks fine. I just feel like it doesn't lock together into a solid finished shape as much as the rest of this dude. But his posability is intense, and the fact that he has such a cool transformation, and then he's got, like, at least in his upper body, for sure, like, Figuarts tier posability. I would almost say he's Figuarts tier posability, not upper tier Figuarts, more like mid-tier Figuarts. On a transforming robot toy that goes from that mode to this robot mode in the way it does, I find that kind of amazing. On his own, Ocular Max Sphinx is a really strong piece of transforming toy, and a great start to Mastermind Creations' new line. He lacks the confident polish of modern reformatted pieces, definitely coming off as more of a debut piece despite the pedigree of production that MMC brings to the table, but I've not encountered any critical construction failures in my own experience with the figure. I'm jazzed as hell if this is where things grow from, provided the bar for Ocular Max continues to rise with upcoming entries. Alongside the Hasumi Masterpiece era, Sphinx fits in pretty well. His car form is detailed enough and in that same mushy alt mode scale as the Fairladies and the Lamborghinis, which means it's around about the same size and shape, but if you look at the driver's seat then things get a little kooky. His robot mode has a lot of componentry, but pulls things together into enough simple shapes and smooth surfaces to look fine in a mixed display. And hooray! He loads into the MP10 trailer! Sphinx is an excellent piece whose biggest mark against him is the lack of foreknowledge of the future. His joints, mostly pins and screws, are very smooth, but what will they be like a year from now? I'm really into the idea of the Studio Ox aesthetic being an alternate draw to the Ocular Max line, but will that united visual quality really play through in Ocular Max's long game, enough to stand on its own without the bullet point of being a masterpiece-alike series? Only time will tell, but the transformation scheme and robot mode articulation are both so well done, I feel like Sphinx has satisfied my imminent needs to a very high degree. He hits my hand-candy taste buds square in their main center mass. So I'm looking forward to handling Ocular Max's second release whenever it comes out. Anyway, this has been Internet Personality Vangelus, and I hope this video has helped you gain some insight into the mirage that Sphinx's first production run is slowly turning into. He'll be out again, sans Parachute, but in a lighter blue color scheme, so don't fret if you miss out, unless you're a massive parachuting robot fan. In which case, listen, Steve, don't worry, it'll be okay.